Today we're going to cover all the ways you can turn common carp into money. Carp are extremely invasive and have ruined many of America's lakes and rivers. And despite massive programs to remove them, they are so numerous, many people consider it impossible to eradicate them completely. But humanity has taken many species that were thought to be so numerous they could never become extinct to the brink of extinction multiple times. We just need some way to make money out of them. So I'm going to catch one of these carp in this little pond here, and then we're going to explore every single way you could possibly make money from them. So I put some bread on a hook and cast it out. And it didn't take long to get a bite. Carp may be annoying, but they sure are fun to fight. This one wouldn't give up, and every time I got it close to the bank, it just kept swimming right back out. But after a couple minutes, we finally got it. And not a bad size either, maybe 3 or 4 pounds. Here's another look at the carp. You can tell it's a female because it's a bit plump. So first thing we're going to do is open her up and see what we can do with any internal organs. And like I mentioned, this one is a female, so we got 2 full ovaries from her. Look at all those eggs. After I pulled out the second ovary, I also pulled out the swim bladder and some liver and heart stuff. The next step was the head, where I removed the pituitary gland from the brain. It's located at the bottom of the brain, and if you dry it with acetone, it can be sold for quite a lot as a spawning agent, either in a powder or whole. I won't do it on this video because it takes a lot of carp to make that much, but I just wanted to let you guys know that it's possible. The next step was to clean out the carp so that we could do stuff with the body, but it had a muscle spasm and swam away, so I had to fish it back out. I got the carp all cleaned off and then set about removing the scales. I did this with just a knife and some elbow grease, scraping in the opposite direction the scales grew. Fish scales are a common product in things like lipstick and makeups, and they're also used for crafts. So I wanted to try to sell them. The reason they're valued at all is because of that iridescence you see on the edge there, and they can be ground up or just used as is. So after I took them all off, I needed to rinse them so they wouldn't have any more slime on them. I did this just by running the water over them a couple times and swishing them around until they were completely clean. Then I set them out to dry with the swim bladder. Next, I had to figure out what to do with all these eggs. There was a lot of loose eggs, but the majority of them were still connected by this connective tissue. And I felt like it would be better to separate them. So I rinsed them a couple times to get the blood out, but there was still all these chunks. I had this little net that had holes that were exactly the same size as the eggs. So what I did is I scooped them up and then I would swish them around and push all the eggs through, but it would leave all the connective tissue inside the net. Then I could just dump it out, and I was pretty happy with the result. I set all the cleaned eggs aside for when I got home, and I got back to the body of the carp. My plan was to remove the skin and the meat. I wanted to use the meat to maybe try making dog treats or something like that, and then I wanted to tan the skin. It took me a second to do, but when I was finished, I had a nice big carp fillet. But since the skin was still attached, I had the tall job of removing the meat. I tried unsuccessfully for several minutes to saw it off with my fillet knife, which was very dull. But in the end, it's honestly just easier to pull it off. This left a lot of meat still on the sides, which I'd have to flesh out later, but I got a nice strip of muscle, and the skin where I pulled it off was very clean. I then repeated the same process on the other side of the fish. First, filleting it and leaving the skin on. But instead of trying to saw it or pull it off, I just decided to flesh it immediately with my buck knife. And I feel like this turned out quite a bit better. There were still little bits of meat, but I could tackle those later. Then I fleshed those side strips of meat off the first piece of skin. They still weren't perfect, and it's really important to remove all the meat when tanning skin. So I'd used a little bit more elbow grease to finally remove all the bits of meat, and the skins were left perfectly clean. Next, I wanted to remove the head, which is really difficult with carp because they have an extremely bony head and a strong spine. So you need a really good knife that's pretty sharp, and you have to jab it into the vertebrae to separate the head. And the reason I wanted the head is I wanted to try and macerate the skull, and I also wanted the teeth. So I finally got the head removed, and you can see that the carp has teeth located in the back of the throat. These are used for grinding and crushing their food. And they look pretty cool when they're all cleaned up. I also think that the bony head plate and gill plates could be used in crafts or as an oddity. So I'll let them both soak in water until they're completely clean. My idea with the meat was to cure it into some sort of animal treat, It has a ton of bones, so I wasn't really sure I wanted to give it to any dogs, but I just wanted to see if I could at least make some into like jerky and maybe feed it to a wild animal or my fish. I set them out to dry for a couple weeks and we'll come back to them. I thought that the carp eggs would make some really good high protein feed, so I decided to try to give them to my fish. And it turns out they really liked them. A lot of the bottom feeding fish in particular really enjoyed eating the eggs, and even the top feeding ones, when they got their mouth on one, really enjoyed them. So I think it's very possible that these eggs could be a very useful fish feed. The only problem is that they probably spoil pretty quickly, so I'm not sure how you would deal with that. But I could see these easily being used as something to plump up your fish, especially if you were getting them ready to breed. I did try drying some, thinking that maybe that would get around preserving the full eggs, and whenever I put them in my fish tank, the fish didn't really seem to like them as much as they liked the whole eggs that were fresh. They still ate them a little bit, but these fish were used to eating flakes, and even then they didn't necessarily seem to enjoy the eggs that were dried. So I'm not sure if it's just because they were super tough, but I don't really think this is as good of an option as the whole eggs. The next step in this project was to tan the fish skins. And I did this by adding a mixture of water, alum, baking soda, and salt, and then mixing it around and letting it sit for a couple days. I had to put these rocks on them to make sure that they stayed under the solution. I then set it out to dry and made sure to stretch it while it was drying so it remained supple. I also had to add neat's foot oil so that it would also retain moisture and not just become a super hard, rough fish skin. The end result was actually a pretty usable leather that I think you could use to make a wallet, or maybe you could do some other sort of leather craft with. It's not as workable as, say, mammal leather like cow leather or deer hide, so I'm not sure how much of a need there is for this leather, and that's my only concern with it. At this point, the skull was macerating quite nicely, so I was just checking it every couple of days, switching out the water, stirring it around so that it would get all the excess meat off, and then just letting nature do its work. And the bones were cleaning up pretty well. I got the jaw bones with all the teeth in it and the skull plate with the gill cover. The only problem was I left them out to dry and a raccoon ate them. I was able to sell the jaw bones and the loose teeth for about $10, so that's something. I think I let the meat dry too long. I wanted to see if a raccoon that was always pillaging my fish would come and try them, so I set it out, and it took like 1 or 2 strips, but didn't really eat very much of it. I decided to try to hydrate them a little bit to see if that would help, but again, when I left them out, the raccoon didn't really seem too interested. So I think maybe using a different dehydration method could maybe make these into usable dog treats or raccoon treats, but they don't seem to be too attractive to wild animals. It did eat the swim bladder though, so that's interesting. I tried listing the scales, the leather, and even a live carp on eBay to see if anybody would buy it. And after a month, I got no hits on the scales and the leather, but I was getting some action on the carp. Someone actually paid to have me ship them a live carp. And I got a lot of other messages with people interested in buying carp. On TikTok, when I posted a video, someone wanted me to get them some mirror carp, and I had someone who wanted me to get some mirror carp on eBay. But in the end, I decided to not ship it because I was just too worried they would end up dying. So in the end, to me, it seems like there's a couple products you could make from carp that would be really interesting. Specifically, I think that the eggs could be a really good fish food, and I would like to explore that a little bit more. I think you could make some money selling that as a premium food to get fish ready to breed. I also think that the bones, like the teeth and those jaws, are also very sellable. There are people who want to buy them for oddities or just decorations. They think they're interesting, so those can sell. But interestingly enough, it seems that the thing you can make the most money on with carp is live carp. I could have made like $300, $400 selling live carp if I was willing to ship them, which is not really what I want to hear. I don't want to be shipping live carp to other places because these carp are really problematic to North American ecosystems. Here at Utah Lake, they've completely destroyed the lake. There's almost no vegetation left in it because of them. So unfortunately, it seems there's still a lot of love for carp, and we just have to find some other way to be able to make them a product besides a live carp. So if you guys have any ideas, please comment them below. Let me know what your thoughts are about this project. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe so I can keep making content like this. Thank you and have a good one.